Hi guys. In this week's tip of the week, I am going to complete the example that we saw in class on how to create 3D extruded text with layer styles on it and some kind of ambient occlusion to create shadows in the background of the text. Now, to do this, we used a combination of Cinema 4D rendering and classic 3D rendering in After Effects, and we combined those into a separate composition as 2D layers. So let's take a look at what the workflow is for this. The first thing I want to do is I want to create a new composition. And this composition will be my master text composition. So I'm going to make it the composition that will contain my text, the master text. So I'll go ahead and click OK on that to create the new composition. And I'm going to double click on my text tool to create text center on my composition. I'm going to type the word text, and I'm using a fairly thick text, the fairly thick typeset. In this case, is called Alfarn. Alfarn, and this you could use any text, but usually I find this effect works better when you have thicker fonts. With that done, I make sure that I separated my characters by changing the tracking between them to about 100 in this case. You expand them as much as you want or contract them as much as you want. By the way, you can actually create an animator for this under the text, and you can animate it through time if necessary. So with that set up, let me go ahead and switch my tool to the selection tool, and I'm going to center my text to my composition. So I'm going to press Control Alt and Home on the keyboard to bring in my anchor point to the center of my layer, and then Control Home to bring the layer to the center of the composition. So that's going to be the text, the master text that I'm going to use. I'm going to colorize this. I'm going to give it a bit of a color. Let's make it a bit like a burnt yellow. And that's just so that I can add some texture to it. Now, everything that I've done so far to this makes part of the contents of the actual layer. So in this case, the text content contains all this information inside it. The path options for each one of the characters that's in there, the path the source of the text, and any other property changes that I might have made to this, including animators that I might have applied to the text. All of that makes part of the properties of the text. So when we want to use this text in other compositions and we want to copy and paste that text with reference to the original layer, meaning this text layer that is inside the master text composition, we don't simply copy and paste. What we do is we copy with properties. And so to do that, let's go ahead and create a new composition, and I'm going to call this one text extrusion because that's where I want to extrude the text. And I want to create a new composition, and I'm going to call this one text cover or text front. Text front would do. And I'll leave it at that for now. So I want to go ahead and go back to my master text, and I want to select the layer that I want to copy with properties, and I'm going to go to Edit, Copy with Property Links. What that is going to do is it's going to copy the content of this layer with reference to this particular layer inside this composition. So when I go to the text extrusion composition and I paste by going Control V or Command V on the Mac, I am pasting that layer that I copied from master text. But if I go and press U on the keyboard when I have it selected, let me press that and open up its settings for the transformation values, you will notice that they all have been scripted, and they are all pointing to this layer in the master text composition. So if I make a change to this text layer here, it will change in this and any other composition in which I have pasted that text. So let's go to the text front and paste that here. Now, going back to the text extrusion composition, I want to turn that layer into a 3D layer, and I want to make sure that I am in the Cinema 4D renderer. And with that done, what I want to do is I want to go to the geometry options, and I want to extrude this to, let's say, about 80 pixels, let's say. So you see that there was some kind of change in the actual depth of the text, but we can barely see it because the light here is all evenly distributed. There's really no lights other than the default light of the program. So I want to create some kind of lights in order to make those extrusion visible. So I want to create a couple of point lights. So to do that, I can go to Layer, New, Light, or I can go to, I can use the shortcut So let's go ahead and choose point light, and I want to make that about 100% in intensity. And I want to make sure that it's casting shadows, and I want to change this to about 40 percentage. Maybe let's make it 100 to start with, and we can always change it afterwards. And then the diffusion, let's make that 0 so you guys can see where this starts by default. So let's click OK, and you'll notice that I have shadows now in the extrusion values. Now, those two values that we talked about a second ago have to do with how shadows are projected in the extrusion or anywhere in the 3D environment. So let me go ahead and move this point light to the right-hand side of my text, and probably a bit into the Z-axis, so that is a little bit more on the side of the text. I want to make a copy of it, so Control D or Command D on the Mac, and I'm going to move the copy across the screen. So that we can see what this looks like, let me switch my view from Active View Camera to the Custom View 3, and you'll see that I have my point lights on either side of the text. If I select them both by Shift selecting them and using my blue arrow to move them on the Z-axis, you see what those lights are doing. Now you'll see that the lights are projecting and creating shadows, but they are not really the text itself is not producing shadows on its own. So if I go to my lights and I press the A key twice in quick sequence, it opens up the light options for those lights, and I can see that my cast shadows is on for the lights, so that's great. Let me close these two again. Now let's go to text and go to its material options, and you'll notice that the cast shadow for the text is off. So when I turn it on, you're going to see shadows being projected in between the texts, in between the characters. So with that done, you'll notice, let me switch back again to my active view, and you'll notice that some of the shadows are actually, let's go ahead and back to the custom view and rotate a little bit my environment to better see those shadows. And you'll notice that the shadows are fairly sharp, as you can see. They're very sharp. And that's where those options for the lights come in. So let me select both lights and press the A key really quick in sequence, AA, really fast. And I want to change the shadow darkness for both lights. Since they're both selected, it's going to change for both when I change one of them. So it's going to be, let's make this about 50%, let's say. And I want to increase the diffusion so that I feather those shadows a little bit. So you can see that they get a little bit feathered as I move that value up. So I'm okay with this for now. Let's go ahead and go back to my active view camera. And I'm seeing the extrusion from the front, so I don't see any issues with this. Now, let's go to the front now, and let's start texturizing this. So to do that, I prefer to do this usually in 2D layers. Since this is going to go into a 3D layer, what I want to do is I want to pre-compose that text layer that I have pasted from master text into text front. I want to select that layer in the text front composition, and I want to pre-compose it into something that I like to call text styles. So this is the style that I'm going to be, the layer in which I'm going to be applying the styles. I want to open that when I pre-compose it so that I can get access to it really quick. So I'll go ahead and click Open New Composition. And now I am inside the text styles with the layer as a 2D layer. I'll go back to text front and make that pre-composition a 3D layer. So I'm going to read it as a 3D layer inside text front, but inside it, in the pre-composition, inside text styles, it's a 2D layer. So right here, I can go ahead and start applying layer styles by right-clicking on the text and choosing, for example, stroke. And I want to increase the value of that stroke. So let me uncollapse stroke, and I want to increase its size to about, let's say, 5. And I want to make it inside. And I want to change the color to something that's a little bit closer to that orange. So something like yellow, perhaps, a little bit lighter yellow. So just to give it some texture. So now you see that there's a little bit of an outline on this that you can increase or decrease over time. Notice that they're all keyframeable. So I want to make that 5 for now, and I want to keep it as is. Then I want to create a copy of this. I want to apply another stroke to this, but for that one, I'm going to use what I did in class, which is I used a fractal noise to create some kind of texture on the border. So to do that, I made a copy of the text layer here, and I increased its stroke value to about 10 in this case. And let's say I want to go ahead and make that white. And I want to make the color of the text black. So now I have black and white information, which, as you know, I can use as a Luma mat. So for this, I want to create a new solid. And it doesn't matter what color the solid is. I just want to make sure that it's the comp size so that it covers the entire comp. And I applied the fractal noise filter to this layer. So that gave me the little webby looking filter. And we're going to be talking about this filter in a lot more detail in the next couple of weeks. What I want to do for this is I want to reduce the complexity of it, and I want to scale it to about 200% its current value. So I just want the texture from it so that it almost looks like liquid metal when I pre-compose this into, or I place it into the Luma mat of the black and white text that I had just created. So I just brought in that texture underneath my black and white text, and now I can go ahead and switch my switches to my modes, and I'll use Luma mat from those options. So as you can see, I have created this little texture that is now on top of my text, and it's an outline. Now this is now part of the text front. Even though text front, it contains a 3D layer, and then there's the extrusions layer. So what I want to do is I want to grab text front and text extrusions and collapse that into a separate composition. So if I want to go ahead and create a new composition, let's say, and I want to call this one text final, I can go ahead and inside text final, I can drop in my text front, text extrusion behind it, and now you can see that this is recognizing both the Cinema 4D, which is the extrusion, and the classic 3D render, which is this one right here, the text front. Let me switch that to classic 3D. Now let's go back to the text styles and keep on stylizing this a little bit more so that we get more details into this. So let's say, for example, I want to apply just the outline, the yellow outline, to what I had before. So let me go ahead and perhaps bring in this to the top. And how do I drop that color from this? Well, the same format that we followed before. So let me keep this one in the background, make a copy of it. And I'm going to bring in that one with the yellow thing to the top. And I want to make that, again, the stroke on that one, I want to make it white. And I want to go ahead and change the color of the font to black. So now I get me another track mat, or Luma mat in this case. I can copy my texture from the white solid, and instead of using a white solid this time, I want to make that solid, let's say, yellow, just like the text is up here. I can go ahead and go to the layer drop-down menu, solid settings, and pick the color of that little yellow here on my preview window, up here on the project window. So I'll click new, and that gives me that yellow texture for that particular layer. Then I can go ahead and apply Luma mat to this and turn off the visibility of my layer here. And now I have what looks to be the exact same thing. And the reason for that is because this, even though I turn this layer to yellow, it's being overwritten by the fractal noise. But you'll notice that fractal noise at the very bottom has blending modes. So I can go ahead and change the blending mode from normal to, say, multiply or add as necessary. Add makes it pop a little bit more. And so there you have it. Now you have texturizing by adding styles to the layer. Okay, I can even use that same information, this combination of things, to create a drop shadow in between those two layers if I wanted to make it a little bit, to make it pop a little bit more. So for example, I could go ahead and make a copy of these two layers and then make the texture on the, sorry, not that one, the one below. So I'll go ahead and use these two and maybe change the settings on the fractal noise, turn down the brightness so that I can make it darker, and change the stroke size of the actual text. So let me go ahead and change the stroke size from 5 to, I will eyeball this a little bit, to, let's say, 7. And you'll notice that I get a little bit of an indentation on my text that is produced by just the changing the brightness of my fractal noise on the layer that's being track matted into that particular outline. So just with the same layer copies and changing the values of the stroke, I am getting all this texture out of the text. When I go to text final, it is implemented in there. Now, the same way that we copied and pasted the objects, that layer, the text, the master text, with its properties and pasted it into other layers, is the same way we're going to copy and paste cameras. So if I create a camera on the text final, and let's say I create a camera, and I'm going to make it a 2-node camera, 35 mil is fine, and I am going to apply an orbit null to it. So to do that, I'll right-click on the camera and go to the orbit null. Now remember that the orbit or the null controls, this null one controls my camera. So if I do move my null, my camera will move. But these other layers, right now, the 2 layers that I have here, as you can see, they are 2D layers. So they're not going to respond to my camera motion. What I need to do is I need to select both the camera and the null object. And then I'll go to Edit, Copy with Property Links. Then I'll go to the extrusion layer, Paste at the very top. Then I'll go to Text Front, Paste into that one. And that's it. Those are the only 2 layers that actually need to have cameras inside them. Since I copied with property links, then those cameras and those null objects will obey the ones in my master layer over here in my text final. So if I go ahead and control and let's say rotate the camera control over here, my text is all going to rotate in 3D, and it's going to retain the classic 3D rendering from the one in front and the extrusion from the Cinema 4D. The beautiful thing about this is that all of this is still obeying my master text. So if I go to my master text and it turns out that I didn't want to say text, I wanted to say the word hello instead, I'll just go back and change the master text. And if I go to my text final, my text updates. You will also notice that my text gets a little bit faded because it's very dark on the sides. I can go back to the text extrusion composition and create an ambient light, for example. So I'll create an ambient light in this composition. I want to make it about 50% and click OK. And you'll notice that it gets really bright in here. But when I go back to my final, it actually looks like it's pretty well lit. Now, since I have camera and a null object here in this composition, and I have a camera, I can also add 3D layers in this composition. So if I go ahead and create a solid here, and let's keep the same color, for example, and I'm going to make it about twice as big in all directions, so times 2, times 2 here. Then I'm going to make it a 3D layer, and I'm going to bring it to the bottom of the stack. Now that becomes the background for my composition, and it obeys the rotation value of my camera. So if it's basically I'm looking at a layer that is positioned in 3D space with reference to my camera, but because it's at the bottom of the stack underneath all of the other compositions that are 2D, it will respect their 3D look as long as you're looking at them from the front. If you get past looking from the front, you'll notice that you get some weird artifacts. Things just get weird. The layer seems to jump from the front to the back and vice versa. So you can try to compensate for that by making sure that you never go behind the text if you want to. If you want the text to be actually obeying the 3D space, then do not create it in this composition. Go back to the extrusion and create it in the extrusion layer and push it in 3D space by 100 pixels. That's what you should do in a case like that. Now, let's go ahead and rotate this back to where it's more legible. And let's go ahead and create the ambient occlusion, that is the shadow that goes behind the letters. So to do that, I'm going to make a copy of the text front, and I am going to bring it underneath the text extrusion. Now, I can go ahead and make that a 3D layer here, or I can go ahead and let's make it a 3D layer right now. Or I can keep it as is, since it's obeying the position of this one, and I can go ahead and apply a fill to this. Now with the filter, I am going to change that fill to black, and I am going to apply a Gaussian blur to this as well. And for the Gaussian blur, I am going to go big. I'm going to go to like about 25, 24, something like that. Let's go 30. And when I'm looking at this from the front, then I get that little halo of shadow. That is what we call ambient occlusion. It's trying to recreate that. If you want to emphasize this more of the lighting on the background, you can actually add a light in here as well. So if you add a light in this composition, make it a point light, and let's make it 100 and keep the settings from the other one. So that's 50 and 40 if I'm not mistaken. Then that light is affecting your background here, but it's not affecting your text. However, if you wanted to affect your text, then you can either copy with properties, or you can start working with your continuously rasterized settings to make sure that you bring back that information into to the 3D information from the Cinema 4D into this composition. Now let me go ahead and push that background 100 pixels in 3D space, and push my back, which is this one. I should name it text back. Always rename your layers, and position that in 3D space as well if you want to push it in 3D space. Okay, but as of now, basically this looks pretty clean. Okay, now what I want to do is I want to go back to layer styles, and I want to create a little bit of a kind of like a white reflection on this. And to do that, what I want to do is I want to create a solid on top of everything. A white solid would do. So let's bring a white solid right on top of this text, of the bottom text layer, the reference layer for the entire stack. And on that one, I want to apply a mask. So I want to make sure that I select the text, the white solid, and I want to make sure that I select my ellipse tool to create a mask. I want to create a mask that's about half this size, like so, over here, and that covers only half of my text. Now, with that selected like so, I want to make sure that I click on this little swatch right here, this little switch under the toggle switches and modes, right? I'm on the track mat, not on the track mat itself, but to the left of it, right here. This will maintain, it will use the visibility or the alpha information of whatever is below it to stencil itself. So if I click on that, it's going to use the information in the text too that is below it to stencil itself, and that's what it did. Now with this mask selected, I'm going to make a copy, and I'm going to subtract that one from the previous one. At the same time, I am going to feather it. And when I feather it a little bit, let's say like so, I create that little halo that gives the impression that there is kind of like a glow, almost like it's a reflective glow, as you can see. You can modify the settings for that, obviously. Now, when I go to the text final, I am getting what looks like very glossy text. Really good quality text. And that's how you achieve that effect.